past could be equity work, but I think that the moment where it became crystal clear, or the light went on, or however you want to, whatever metaphor you want to use, was in late 2015 when I was in Durham, North Carolina, as a part of a learning collaborative. I went through a 3-hour racial equity training. And this was the first moment where it sparked something in me that I'd never felt, but this training was so powerful because the training talked about racial equity, but it used data to back up the arguments. So it was powerful for me when I was going through this, because I was like, wow, here's data to show what I feel and I know is happening. Because so often racial equity trainings or discussions around race center around your feelings, and then it's really easy to dismiss somebody's feelings as, oh, Trey, you're just paranoid, or, oh, that's not really how it is, you're just reading into this, and it's something that that's not really what's going on. But during this session, we were able to, the trainers were able to show with data that, in education and health, in the juvenile justice system, across all these systems, the disparities that we were seeing, happened across racial lines. And so all the Black and brown people in our session were like, holy bleep, this is like data telling me, like, this proves everything that I know to be true. And it shows it unequivocally to people who don't believe that this is true. So like I said, we did this training in Durham. There was a group of about 20 of us from Northeast Ohio who were there. After the training, that night we went out because, we were in Durham for 2 or 3 days, and we were doing the dog and pony show, and we were going, visiting, and see all these things. And we ended up at a bar, and there was a group of probably 7 or 8 of us, and we had this raw, honest conversation about what we had just experienced together, about our own personal experiences. At one point of the night, I was arguing with a high-ranking city official, and I thought we were going to come to blows. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. But, by the end of the conversation, we hugged, we talked about things, and it was just powerful because, this group from Northeast Ohio, and all the groups from the other cities had this, but, specifically our Northeast Ohio group, we talked about this for the next day and a half. We came home and we tried to talk about it with our friends and our colleagues and our family members and our loved ones, and they just didn't get it because they didn't have that same shared experience. They didn't have that vocabulary and that just powerful, moving experience. So we said, okay, one, we can't continue to share this with them because they're not in a fair place to continue this conversation. And so we decided we needed to bring these trainers to Northeast Ohio. So we brought a set of the trainers in April. We brought them back in September. The feedback was positive. People were shocked. They were appalled. They were felt compelled to do something, but we just didn't know what that was. We were having very honest, real conversations about race and equity. And like I said, they were great conversations, but we still just didn't know what to do with that. And so there was a group of us who had gone to Durham and a group of other leaders. So there was, nonprofit, philanthropic, government. We had a real great cross-section, with the exception, I will say, of business leaders we invited. They were really slow to even come to this conversation. They're like, oh, this is great, but all right, we'll get to it. So, but we had this coalition of folks, and we said, look, how do we move this forward? And so what happened was we developed a plan, and one of our partners, who was a community development intermediary, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, they said, look, we are going to lead a year of awareness building. So throughout 2017, we invited this group, the Racial Equity Institute, back throughout the entire year. So once a month they came in, they ran a half-day, 3-hour training, which is the first one that I went through, and then they ran a more expansive 2-day training. So they did 1 half-day and 1 2-day training every month throughout 2017. And then in addition to that, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, our partner, ran book clubs, and they screened films such as like 13th, and they had discussion groups around that. And so we really just tried to, as a collective group, elevate the discussion around race and around equity. And I would say there's a ton of momentum around this, to the point where now I think by the end of this year, there will be approximately 1,500 or so people who've had some touch point with this group, the Racial Equity Institute. And what we're trying to do now is just figure out, like, now what do we do? Because now we thought it was important to raise awareness because to some people in the community, they heard this and they got it. They're like, yes, I get this. I see this. This makes sense to me. And there were others who were still even just arguing that this is like, no, we don't believe that. But it's really hard to argue with the data, because what we found is that, we would invite people in from, who were public health people, and they would know the public health statistics, but they would be appalled to know that those same statistics were showing up in education or in the community or in the criminal justice system, or in banking or in lending for homes. And so, what we found was that that the data was really important, because we were using sources that they used and that they knew to be true in their own sphere, but they didn't realize that it was going across industries. So, like I said, right now we have a lot of momentum around it. Philanthropy has been very instrumental. One, in terms of funding, but two, also just in terms of attending the sessions and trying to figure out and strategize what goes next. But I will say that I can't say that I'm entirely in love with Philanthropy's response, because I feel like while we've been receptive to it, philanthropy has been really slow to accept its own role in the problem. I'm becoming more and more outspoken about the challenges of philanthropy. And so one of the things that I'm doing now is that I sit on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee of our statewide philanthropic association, Philanthropy Ohio. And when I joined, 2 years ago, we were just like putzing around and meeting and talking about, definition of diversity versus, inclusion and all these other things. And what I really tried to push us forward on is saying, look, we have leaders in philanthropy who've gone through these trainings, who think that they're valuable, who are trying to now say, hey, nonprofits, that we fund, we want you to be more equitable. But we're not looking at ourselves and saying, well, hey, how equitable are foundations? And so what I'm really trying to push our DEI committee to do is say, like, okay, how do we spend 2018 examining ourselves? How do we look in the mirror and say, all right, is philanthropy equitable? Is it diverse? How are we engaging the community in these important decisions that we're making about funding, about programs that are going to help the community? And so, we're now looking at, doing a research project around, diversity and philanthropy statewide. We're talking about doing a power analysis. We're going to launch another speaker series. We're trying to figure out, and I also want to make sure that philanthropy invests some real dollars to make this effort go. It's important work. Philanthropy realizes it's important, but they, like I said, still slow to acknowledge their own role in this and the power dynamic that exists from a foundation and setting those agenda points. I guess I can stop and see if people have questions. Like I said, I don't want to ramble too much, but I wanted to give a little bit about what's going on in Northeast Ohio, and see if you have questions, see if there are things that you have thoughts on. I don't know if that covers some of the things you were hoping.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
So the racial
Yes.
so you brought programs here. Are they still running? I would love to participate.
Yes, so they are still ongoing. They'll be ongoing through the end of this. They'll be ongoing definitely through the end of this year. We're already in talks about continuing them into 2018. I don't know what the frequency of that's going to be, but I think there are still a few spots maybe available, but.
Yeah, my understanding is that the groundwater, which is the half-day intro, has a couple, including some that aren't in Cleveland. There's one that I'm going to. It's my second time actually. It's like an hour away from here because it's the only day at the calendar. But there's a few. You just have to really look at the calendar and find them. The 2-day, I think, is actually finding a slot over there for the 2-day would be very difficult for this year. I actually think they're almost all full. Maybe a handful of slots at the end of the year.
What do you see as the tipping point in either Northeast Ohio or, we'll just start with Northeast Ohio, in terms of the training to broad-based change?
I think that it's going to be, I think the tipping point is going to be organizations taking it upon themselves to actually advance the work as opposed to waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. What I found a lot of people are doing, especially philanthropy, but people go through this, especially the half-day session, and they want to walk away. They're like, all right, give me something. Like, tell me what to do. Give me like a checklist so I can do these and I can check this off and we can say we did equity and now we move on to the next thing. And the trainers are intentional, and it frustrates the crap out of people who go through this, is that they say, look, I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm not going to tell you what to do next. You know what? I need you to sit with this. Sit with this uncomfortableness. Sit with this and like internalize it. And then when they go through the 2-day session, they give you a little bit of a framework for what you should do next. But a lot of it is around gathering data in your own sector, and then it's trying to really assess where you're at. So I think the tipping point is going to be when organizations start planning on their own what to do. Because I think once you start actually doing the work, then, or once you go through this, it's hard not to see inequities everywhere. I mean, I think about this when I wake up in the morning. It's the first thing I think about. It's the last thing I think about when I go to bed. I think about it during the day, and I will say my foundation, I'm in a really unique situation. So I mentioned how narrowly focused my foundation is. Candidly, I would say from a board level, I don't think that our board buys into what I'm doing, and 100%. My boss has been very generous to say, look, you get your work done, that's fine. And gives me the freedom to kind of do this on the side, but I don't think they see this as key to what we do, which is so disappointing that they don't understand that there are inequities in entrepreneurship. So.
Which is really interesting because Deb, which is Treye's CEO, she was key to bringing it here. Her leadership was key to bringing the REI training here. So in terms of that tipping point and where foundations see their role starting and stopping, people are very comfortable, I think, with this idea of awareness and introduction, less comfortable with action and implementation and, critical evaluation. And so you can see this example where the support stopped.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's, yeah.
So I have a question. So thinking about your comments and sort of thinking of my experience in the world of Chicago, which has a very rich philanthropic sector, I almost feel like we're in a situation where it's a bit reversed in terms of more foundations each year becoming more on board with this idea and concept of racial equity. However, in conducting site visits and meetings with community-based organizations and other organizations, and I'm finding that same sort of realization and understanding of the concept is not there. And I think a lot of it has to do with the very fact that the leadership of these organizations, for the most part, when I'm sitting at the table, it's the CEO, the CFO, or the DOD, and they're all white. Yes, they serve a 90% community of color, or are even located in the community, but they themselves, as leadership, don't understand the concept. And so I'm wondering, how do you move forward when sort of philanthropy, at least in Chicago, is becoming more, I would say, better versed in racial equity, but I think that a lot of the community-based organizations and a lot of grantees, they're not there.
Well, you get into a whole question of who has power and what do they do with it. And that's where it gets really complicated. And we, as dangerous people, I just want to say we are all dangerous. And the minute we're not dangerous, we ought to move aside and let somebody else in. Need to think strategically about how to move that agenda. Because it's not going to happen out of their own willingness to give up their positions. And I mean, we all have fought so that's kind of one thing. And then, I mean, we just, as in philanthropy, if we have any power at all and we have the backing, we have to make sure that people are walking the talk. So, and it's a hard thing to do, but I think that we've got to just continue. Treye has said, his work is about racial justice. I mean, that's where your soul is, where your heart is. That's what the work is. The greater population sees that as an afterthought, and that's why we haven't made as much gain as we need to, and they're afraid of it. I mean, just look at the politics right now. And that is a manifestation of their fear. Now, the truth be known, we will not treat them the way that we have been treated. So anyway.
Yeah, I would just add, I think, what excites me about what's happening in Northeast Ohio, while, what I heard is Chicago people are using the language, right? So there's an interest, but maybe they're not all meaning the same thing. We're here because REI gets thoughtfulness to bring it here. We have a common language that is really being disseminated across the community. And the network of community members is growing every year. So last year, it was actually started first, and it was really focused on the community development system with odds and ends for partners who connect to community development. So funders who connect to the community development system. Our Commission for Economic Inclusion was there, or our major entrepreneurship organization was there because they connect to the system. If you weren't connected to the system, you probably didn't know it was going on. But it was a starting point. This year has allowed opportunity for people to hear about it in different spaces and then to sign up on their own. So you really do have that language being used in sectors that don't connect to philanthropy every day and don't connect to community-based work every day. And that's very powerful because we really are using the same language. That's the first. I think just the first step. Yeah, and that's different. I think from what I've seen in other places. Even the action isn't there yet.
So I'm relatively new to philanthropy, though I may be aware at some level about the racial inequity that's going on. Probably at the level that this institute teaches, which I'm excited to learn more about. But I wanted to ask, is there anywhere that is on the right track to solving the issue that we're dealing with, that we may be able to look at as an example and say, this is what they're doing, but maybe we should add this or something to build upon? Or is this is the beginning here?
Anywhere like a place or an organization?
Yeah, like where is there a city or an organization in particular that's doing it in the direction that you believe that it should be going in?
There's some cities I know, like Oakland has like equity. Yeah, I think Austin may have like an equity officer. And
Yeah.
So I attended. I'm from Cleveland. I work in a clinic, and I attended. And I think my question was more like, when do we engage the leaders? Like more the leaders, like City Hall. I don't know if they all went through the training, which goes back to which cities are doing this at that city level. Because I think yes, as businesses, we can move that agenda strategically and start trainings. But then how do we make sure that at the city level and that equity gets put into the policies?
Okay. Cindy.
Go ahead, Augustine.
Oh, I didn't know. Thank you. I'm Augustine Arbalou, and I'm sorry I'm not there. I'm not totally hearing everything because it gets garbled a little bit around the racial equity, but in Michigan, we have a number of initiatives around racial equity. We have cities that have actual racial equity structure and frameworks that they're working in. They're part of initiatives. Grand Rapids is one. Ottawa County and Washtenaw County, another one. I know the city of Flint's looking at racial equity. I, as the director of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which is the state department, we also have a racial equity framework that we are strongly embedding. Everybody in part of my staff has received 8 hours, at least 8 hours of baseline racial equity training. And I've got some of the agents of change that have received 10, 12, 14 hours. And then we have an additional 8 hours of training coming next week. And I thought I heard someone mention about an equity officer position and how you embed it. in the Department of Civil Rights, we have that position currently open, and I think we've got over 70 applications for that position. So we view racial equity as a very important component in the work that we're doing, and we are working with a number of foundations, both community foundations in various cities, as well as some of the larger foundations that have national prominence. The other thing that I would mention is that along racial equity, I don't want you to forget about TRHT, Truth, Racial Healing, Transformation, which is an area that's very important to the work that we're doing. And there are 4 initiatives in Michigan, 4 cities in Michigan that we're working with.
And the Kellogg Foundation has a big piece of that too, right, Augustine?
Yes, Kellogg Foundation. In fact, we've been in conversation with Kellogg Foundation regarding that piece. In Michigan, there are 4 communities, Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, Lansing, and Flint, that have TRHT initiatives. The reason that we play a role here at the state level is we recognize that each community is at a different point in time in the development of their TRHT initiative. So we are able to take a much broader perspective and provide some support and resources to those initiatives. Yes, Kellogg's is involved in it, as well as the Michigan Council for Foundation, along with the various community foundations in each one of those cities.
So
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I think that I love that Michigan seems to be really have thought about this and working on this as the government's working on this. But I would say that one of the real takeaways for me from, and I've been doing racial equity work my entire career, so let me just put that out there. There's always new stuff to think about. When I did the 2-day training, one of the big takeaways was really, again, being reminded, because you forget, just being reminded of how embedded racial inequity is into every public structure, and not just public and social. Every structure that this country is based on is built on a component of racial inequity. And so regardless of the leadership, right, it's literally designed to operate agnostic to race, perspective, experience, position, opinion of any individual person, right? And that's something I think if you're talking about government, change in our public sector, that you really, really have to remember. And I think, not to say that work you can't make change, because you can, but you have to really be considerate about where your efforts are targeted and how deep in the weeds you really, really have to be. One of the examples from the training that, again, this is one of the pieces that really stuck with me this time around, it was Obama, right? We love Obama. I'm going to speak for the room. I don't want to hear anything else. But even in his role, when he came out with his Community Reinvestment Act, which is an infrastructure investment that went across the country, when you do a racial analysis of where those dollars went and to what companies received those dollars to implement that work, it's inequitable. Companies operated and owned by people of color or women did not receive the same amount of investment. Now, do you think he did that intentionally? Absolutely not, right? Do you think that they probably applied a very special lens to try to open it up? Probably did. I would give them the benefit of the doubt. But the details and the criteria, and it was really thinking about the generational impact of discrimination on a company that would then be eligible to receive dollars through that program. And so you really have to think about stuff, not just in my 4 years in my administration or my 8 years of what I can do in my position today, but I'm making a decision. I have to consider how racial equity has impacted the community I'm trying to target over 5, 10 generations since the founding of this country. And that's a perspective that a lot of public officials don't have the coverage to take the political risk, and don't have the time, quite frankly, in short terms, we have a really short term limited position to address. So I just keep that, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that, so I mean, so I think there are places that are doing good work, but I do think that point about about the systemic nature and how it's so ingrained into the fabric of the way our country was designed is important. And I think about a key leader in Northeast Ohio who I really have a ton of respect for, a great relationship with. When he went through the half-day training, his first thought was like, I wish we'd have more time to talk about all the good things we're doing. And I'm like, that's great. I was like, I respect that. But what was great was that we had one of our partners who actually ran some Cleveland data, some Northeast Ohio data. Because what happened was that, REI is based in Durham. They presented, data from Durham. They presented it from Texas, I think from Texas. They had some national data. And it was funny because I think in the room people were like, oh yeah, that's cool, but that's the South. Like, we're better here. And when we showed the data from Northeast Ohio, it was worse in some cases. And that hit home for people to say like, okay, it's great to go to this training. You see this national data and you're like, oh, well, we can't really be that bad. But then when the trainers put our data up there next to it, people's mouths hit the ground and they're like, oh crap, like, I guess I'm not doing as great as I think I am, which is hard because this isn't this is going to come across to a lot of people when you do this work as an indictment on the work that they've done. This isn't to say that we're not doing great work and it's not impactful, but this is so entrenched that you're not going to be able to have a training for a year and think that you solve this problem. You're not going to be able to fund some program or run something out for 2 or 3 years or 5 years and think that you're going to solve this problem. I mean, these are structural issues that our country was set up to continue on forever. And you're going to have to think on a structural level. You got to think across silos, and that's hard work.
Well, I just wanted to say that, and I think thinking about it in individual terms, we shouldn't think about it that way. I mean, it's exactly what Treye was saying. These are all systems that are set up to keep certain people out and certain people in. And as harsh as that sounds, and people, when I first started thinking about this, I said, that can't be true, and it is true. It is really true. I mean, if you look at anything, if you look at college, right now I'm at the Humphrey School. And yesterday we had a diversity and inclusion meeting, and I said, how much are we willing, how big a fight are we willing to take on to change the system? Do you think that intelligence is only that narrow part that the academic group has decided it is? It is not. Kurt Carlson, who started the Radisson Hotels, was a C student, and he had a building right next door. I said, his building is right next door. And it's like, so how do we think about the systems that we're working in, and how do we know them better than other people and try and make sure that they're working on our behalf and the behalf of our community? And people are not going to like it because it gets into the power game. And so you're going to have to do it very sweetly with a big smile, and you're going to have to take on the fight because it is a fight. And like Treye, I mean, everybody would say, oh, Sandy, you just keep saying that stuff over and over again. And I said it all the way through my government career and all the way through my philanthropic career. And it did hit the Minneapolis Foundation at the end before I was leaving, and I have to say, they just hired a white male after me, right? I mean, they can only take so much of us, and then they have to kind of revert back. I mean, that's the thing I'm saying. Anyways, we were giving most of our grants, the ones that weren't donor advised, to organizations that were headed by communities of color. And it was the first time that, they were doing the hard political work of taking the system on, and we were funding them. Whether it was SEIU as the union, and SEIU was was advocating for janitors, but they started taking on the education union because the education union does not care about our children. So anyway, I mean, there are just so many systems. So we can't think about this as an individual players. We have to think about this as systemic, as deeply rooted, and that there's a lot of conflict that will take place when you start trying to move the agenda in the other way. And you have to be ready for that.
Which goes to, I forget who commented on how we reach the leaders, right? And that individual accountability is a real touchy component of this work, and it's probably not the best approach, right? To say you are responsible to make change, because everybody say, well, I already made the change. I put it in my talking points. I hired a black male on my staff.
Right.
I'm doing what I said I was going to do. And on top of that, I am not racist, and they're not, right? I mean, because again, it's not about the individual, and the point of systemic inequality is that it doesn't depend on the individual, and so think about in your context how important is the individual to your strategy. If you're increasing awareness, that probably makes a lot of sense. If you need to incorporate language, if you need to incorporate awareness, if you need the vision statement, like I need the words racial equity in my strategic plan, that's powerful. But when you're talking about implementation, or you're talking about institutional change, maybe you're really looking at the program director who's designing the policies for the program. Or maybe you're really looking at your HR policies, or really at your operations policies. When is my building open? Different, it's in the weeds that doesn't attack, doesn't focus on an individual person.
Right. So I just wanted to quickly comment on that, sort of this idea about the difference between the concept and the implementation of it. And I think that's really key when you think about it. So to your question about, what are some initiatives or things that are happening that are more aligned with this racial equity concept. So at the Field Foundation of Illinois, one of the new things, so we just introduced our new grant making model. And it was sort of seen as pretty landmark even in Chicago, because we basically said 60% of all of our dollars are going specifically to these particular communities and to only organizations that are led by Alana staff or Alana leaders. So we're like, great, we feel really good about this new vision, new model. And then now we're in the process of trying to figure out, what does that mean? So how do you define Alana? Do you stick to the strict definition, or, this agency is really progressive, but, the board, they're not so much, but their leader and their staff is. So it's really this question now that we're facing in terms of, okay, this is great, but how do we implement it? And I think that what we're finding is that this concept of racial equity and the thought of making progress, it's about redefining. So you have this vision, okay, figure out, we're going to do A, B, and C. It's not working, so you go back and say, okay, we're not going to scrap it, but how do we make it better? And I feel like that's kind of where we're at.
A couple of things here. One is really getting clarity on what you want to achieve and how you're going to achieve it. I mean, I think your insight on, you can have the policy, but implementation is a whole different ballgame. I mean, you can pass the law, right? There's a lot of laws, but implementing and defending against, violations of that law is totally. So how do you do it? How do you do it strategically? And one of the shifts that we made at the Minneapolis Foundation was to think about our nonprofits as partners. And it's like they can tell you. I mean, we have constantly said we're going to put up this competition among people, and yet some folks are starting generations behind. If you look at the Latino nonprofits in Minneapolis and St. Paul, it's like they haven't had the run that all of the big white organizations have had. So how do we make up time for them? How do we make up time for African American grassroots organizations that want to take on heavy-duty political groups? So we started a whole series of trying to listen hard and then consulting with those nonprofits. They still had to compete in some way, but we knew, who was doing the work down at the level that we think it needed to be done. So you start reestablishing and changing the partnerships that you have with those nonprofits. And I know it's hard for you because you don't want to look like you're leaning towards this or leaning towards that. Your boss is on your back. You're the only brown person or black person on your staff, and it's like, oh my God. I mean, I actually had somebody come to me, when I started at the Minneapolis Foundation saying, and she happened to be a person of color, and she said, "You're going to do that with the Latino community?" And I said, "Would you have said that to Emmett Carson? Would you have said it to Emmett Carson?"
African American.
Right, and he
CEO.
runs Silicon Valley, which is an $8 billion community foundation organization. So it's like, get ready for the pushback and get ready to say, yeah, I'm going to do this. This is why our foundation exists.
And don't forget that white communities have been doing it
This
for
forever,
themselves.
forever. So, but redefining those relationships with the people you want to do business with and giving them the kind of support and the kind of TA that they need, because they're not going to come all whole. They haven't had the same run as the big white organizations. So we're going to have to do something more. And some people aren't going to like it, and we're going to have to live with that. Trey, what's your experience in that? I mean, you're in the entrepreneurship business.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a whole bunch of ways I can go with this. So first, I'll start by saying, did I tell you guys about my organization and my board? I know I said they're not open, but so I joined the organization. I was the only man. So there were 8 white women on our staff. Before I joined, there were 8 white women on our staff and 7 white men on our board. So I walk in the door and I'm like, man, I'm checking every box. And it's great. And let's say, and it's.
That was a total.
Yeah. I mean, we're a small foundation. Like I said, the staff was 8. It was 8 white females on staff before I got there, and it was 7 white men on the board. So I mean, I walked in and they're like, "Oh, we're so happy to have you. We think you're going to bring a difference in perspective." And I'm like, "Do you really want my different perspective?" And so, and I found out early that, and I've had some really good support system. I would say, that's going to be, before I forget about that, make sure you have support if you're going to do this work, because you're going to feel like you're banging your head against the wall. But I remember there was one board meeting where I was bringing a group of community organizations forward that were not known to my white male board, that were doing great work in the community, led by, almost exclusively by people of color, or, and they didn't appreciate that difference in perspective. I mean, I was raked over the coals. To the point where, there were one question for each of the other grantees. I probably got about 10 questions for each of these. And it was like a fight, to the point where, I had other staff members jumping in to help me. My president had to come to, afterwards and said, "Trey, I'm so thank you for the way that you put up the fight and, hand up yourself." And she apologized on the board, on behalf, because of the way the board treated me. And I'm like, so wait, so you say you want my difference of perspective, but then when I'm trying to give, and we're not talking big dollars here. I mean, I think the largest grant I was talking about was like $50,000. I mean, I'm not moving $500,000. I'm talking like 25,000 here, 30 there, 40 here. And when we started talking about changing the way we did business and we gave money out, then it's like, whoa. We don't know this organization. How did they do this? Who's their executive director? Who are they connected to? I've never heard of him. How good are they? And I'm like, you don't know that about any of these other organizations we funded for the last 30 years. But what you know is that you can look at the board list and say, hey, there's 3 of my white male friends from the country club, and yada, yada, yada. So that's, I mean, it's hard. And so I think this is hard work. And the conversations about race are, I feel like they're hard for Black and brown people as well. It's hard to have those, and people don't understand that. And it's uncomfortable, but you gotta just lean in there, that discomfort, and say, like, okay, I know that. And the other thing I'm trying to do is that I've learned is that I have to, I'm gonna, shouldn't say exploit, because exploit has such a bad connotation to it, but I'm gonna take to the full advantage every opportunity that I have to advance this work. If my boss supports this, but we don't have board support, so I'm gonna push this as far as I can get it with my boss. and you know, and there's another organization we're a partner with, I'm going to push that as far as I can get it. And so I think it's really about saying like, okay, I'm gonna work this as much as I can, and you know, when I get slapped down and told no, I mean, you take some time, you regroup, you rethink it, and you try another way to go about this. But it's hard work. It's really important, but it's, you know, it comes down to power. I mean, another thing that I really want to challenge our statewide philanthropy group to look at is like, okay, you know, how much are we really engaging the community that we're serving? You know, so we're not just sitting up on high and you know, on the top of the hill saying, hey, this is what you guys need to do. You need to do this, without talking to the community. Like, how do we bring the community into the discussion to say, okay, you know, like, you know what's going on. How do we help empower the community to do good? And nobody wants to give up that power, so that's going to just a fight that you're going to have. So, I mean, it's difficult. It's extremely important.
Yeah. The point about you know, it's interesting the networks that and the trust that we have in certain things as they are, sort of status quo, and how we look at difference with a sort of, you know, focus and discriminatory eye is very interesting. And I'm thinking about my experience with nonprofits who have been intentional about bringing board members from other places, or you know, from the hospital, or from wherever, to sit in on certain processes. For example, you know, there's one I'm thinking about that has a cohort of students, and now we want you to be a part of actually choosing what that cohort will look like on the smaller nonprofit level, and they're invited, come see what we do and how we do it. So now all of a sudden they're talking about, oh, I did this thing for this organization. And I wonder how we think about desegregating, if that's you know, the sort of board nonprofit, or just starting to integrate some of those communities so it's not so unfamiliar. That's one-to-one. Can it be more systemic?
Are you talking about board members of color coming on, or?
Well, no. I mean, board members like board members like the ones who were asking you these questions.
Yeah.
How often were they invited, or were they, you know?
Do they come to the site visits?
Exactly.
Do they do the work? I'll tell you, one thing that we did at the Minneapolis Foundation, just as a note, is that we had John Powell. We had a bunch of folks come and do some education. We had Jim Johnson, I don't know who's out of Chapel Hill. He's a demographer. He's an African-American scholar. He is the funniest guy. You think demographer, oh my God, how boring. He is the funniest guy that you've ever heard. And my board loved him. As a matter of fact, we had him at a half day with our board retreat. And he said, here's how the world is changing. And he gave, this was 4 or 5 years ago, and he gave a real eyeful. I mean, people know the world is changing. They know our numbers are going up. There's just so how they experience that, you know, is really, really important. But giving education to your board, if you can get your CEO, the reason I want you all to be CEOs is then you don't have to go through anybody else, right? And Sylvia's working on it, and we're going to have a little conversation here. So is Treye, and I want you all to think about where you want to end up in 5 or 10 or 20 years. Because if you don't have a specific position, even if you don't get there, it'll move your energy in the right way. But you need to be at the top of the organization so that you can make the call on who comes in to talk to your board, about what information gets to them, about how they start seeing the world, and how they have an interface with the community. It's critically important that we have people of color leading the charge.
So I would just add, so prior to my role at United Way, I was the Vice President of Corporate Governance and Governmental Affairs here at the Cleveland Foundation. So I managed our board, I managed my executive team alongside my CEO, the Chief of Staff role, and then of course the policy officials, and that work in and of itself. But in terms of board exposure and how do you build those connections, you know, the education process came, one of the things that I did when I came on board that we did not do before is I moved our board meetings into our grantee spaces, right? As a way, I didn't have the luxury of, because when a small organization, your nonprofit board members tend to be working boards. They understand that they are there to fill some capacity gaps as much as financial, as much as strategic thought decision making. But when you get to larger organizations, that's not the case. These are fundraisers and these are strategic thinkers 9 out of 10 times. And so it's very hard to get them to get engaged, and sometimes you don't want them engaged. You want the division between board and staff, but you still want them to understand, and you need to create opportunities for exposure and connection. And that was a really successful way, and they're still doing it, that I approach that problem. And I would say, in terms of being the leader and being the one to help make those decisions, being that chief of staff, fortunately, my boss, he's a white male here, but he's very socially justice oriented, so we were like this mentally. That was not the case with the rest of the team, and so as we had turnover with the team, being very engaged with him and supportive of him, because you'd be surprised even when you are in that position of leaders to the passive resistance that you can get from staff, right? And so having your internal allies is as important for the CEO as it is for anybody else. And that was a large part of my role, was to be that ally internally, and to do that blocking and tackling, and to do that massage thinking, and to plant seeds, and all that kind of stuff from behind the scenes. And around D&I, I had to do all of that because it was like talking into the wind. And you can imagine the conversations, where it's like, hey, we're hiring, and I would hear him say, maybe not the most legal thing to say, but I would hear him say, I want to hire a black male for this position. Like, we do not have any in the foundation, because there was a point, 70 people, we didn't have a single black male in the foundation. We have an opening, I want one, find one. And then he would get to the final round of candidates, and there wouldn't be any in the pool. And he would say, well, was he speaking Chinese? Like, what happened? And you would, and there's always a reason. There's always a justification. There's always some process, again, belief, some process-based reason and rationale behind why you couldn't find a qualified person of color. And I'm just saying, so you that being, you just have to be aware of that kind of stuff. When you are in that position of power, you have to really look out for the ways that people resist while they're following the rules. And this is going to come up all the time.
So how do you connect that? Because I think that's where I get stuck to, is code switching between the individual and the system, when the problem is at the individual level that is creating the bigger, so as far as diversity, equity, inclusion committees, right? I'm always the first one chosen, obviously. And it's so I get there, and when we show up to the table, I'm always a Latina, Latina, then my professional title, where every other white person shows up as their professional title and never as a white woman or a white male. And so it's so then the discussion dialogue builds off of that identity of what we show up as. And so it's how do I get you to bring your lived experience so that we can be on the same path or on the same channel as we continue here. And then so I'm really stuck on this identity thing, just because I know in strengthening my own identity has been able to create progress in my own life. And being in the education system right now, I realize I'm working to design this program specifically for Latino college students and really reformulate it, because I know that system was not created by them or for them. And so it's how do I get them to graduate college? But then the other part is I can't force this on the community, because there are also students, Latino students, who want to assimilate, and that's fine too. So it's how do you bridge that individual talk with the system talk? Because that's where it's like.
So one question I would ask, and I don't know the answer to it, is what are the obstacles that Latino students are facing that doesn't get the kind of support from the regular program that you have? And start looking there. And also, I think the most powerful thing is to hear what people's individual stories are. So can you bring some students in to talk to your boss, talk to your colleagues, and say, we're gonna have a little panel so that you can hear firsthand what their experience is. Because what happens in my own thinking is that people, I mean, we all have a filter over our thinking, whatever our perspective. I happen to be a Latina, and I'm bicultural, right? We're bicultural here. And so, I can code switch between the two. I grew up, just so you know, my grandparents came up to the migrant stream and settled in Minneapolis in 1924 or 1925. And so came from very, very poor backgrounds. And so, but my mother had this vision where I was going to go to Catholic school. Her kids were going to go to Catholic school. I did, and I was a good student and did well. But here's the thing. People out there don't understand, unless they hear it, unless they can deal with it human to human, what that other experience is. It's like the myth of the bootstraps. Just get going. Just hurry up. Just, pick yourself up and get going. Even though everywhere you turn, there's a problem and an obstacle and somebody who's trying to, keep you down. So I would think about that, but I would use that as your strength. I can see that it's a strength. And I have to say, just one little story. At the Humphrey School, we have some enlightened professors. And we have Bush Foundation, which is a big foundation that the 3M Corporation and one of those founders built. So they do a lot of Bush fellowships. And so there was a whole fellowship grant given to the Humphrey School and the African Wellness and Cultural Center to look at how do we bring people of color along in big systems. The first thing we have to do is understand who we are as African Americans, as Latinos, as Native people, as Asian people, and as people of color, or whatever. Everybody's got a culture. So that's our touchstone, right? It's where we go back to when we want comfort and when we want support, most of us. But the other thing we have to learn is what are the other skills in the broader world? Whether it's strategy, whether it is thinking in a systemic view of how things work. So, but between those two things, we have an advantage because we can always go back and touch, those things that we love dearest and that can give us support. My abuelita, my mother, was the person, is the person who, drives my energy a lot of the time. So, but I'm just saying that we have now a little program, and we were just interviewing people of color mostly about going into this program, and we have to pick 90 people applied, and they're mostly people of color. But they go through this to get grounded in their own culture, and then to be able to fly into all of the other arenas that we have to fly into as people of color. They also get a $5,000 grant with this, which is a sweet little spot. But finally, there's some really creative thinking about how do we make sure that we're going to support people like you and all of you and me and Sylvia in these spaces. And can you find the support that you need in order to keep pushing for these young people? I don't know that was an answer, but.
The other, we just, if I can just add, I think the other thing to consider is perspective, right? And so we go through D&I training, or you bring your own personal experience into the room, and you forget that you really have to manage and include the perspectives that other than yours in your strategy for how you're approaching racial equity, or really any work, but in this case, they were talking about racial equity. And So in your example, there's a reality that white counterparts at the table, one of the primary reasons I would put money on it, that they don't start the conversation with I'm a white man at the table, is because society doesn't identify them like that, right? They aren't taught to think about themselves with their identity first, and so it doesn't even occur to them that their perspective and their cultural perspective is valuable to the conversation, because they may not even realize they have a cultural perspective.
And they do.
Right, and they do, but they may not realize it because their cultural perspective is presented as the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the basis, it's the starting place, and anything that differs from their cultural conversation, well, that's actually cultural because it's different. No.
White privilege.
Right,
Well, that's exactly.
But and so that's how it shows up. But but instead of, it's not always coming from a negative place. It's not always coming from a intentional space. It literally could just be, it's an unconscious reality for them. And that's just something for you to keep in mind. Again, so when you are chairing the next D&I council, you can decide, do you want to open the meeting and force everybody to identify their cultural identity and watch people's
experience
and watch how challenged people are and be comfortable with that discomfort. That's a choice that you will be able to make when it's your turn. And until then, you can maybe raise the issue. Actually, I'm not the only one here. Or say, don't identify me that way.
So the other thing is, right, getting into the weeds, and it's like I feel like I do contradict myself, and like this should happen, but then this should happen, which is like, okay, really bringing that individualistic and that system language, but then how do you get to the point to making it a norm where it's no longer a professional of color, it's just a professional, bringing that into the space.
You have to point it out. They don't even know that they're making that distinction. I mean, I almost want to bet on it that it's so. I mean, you think, how can they not know that? That they're calling me out like this, and they're not playing that same game with themselves. Just call them out on it in a meeting, and or say something like, "Hey, I really feel, however you feel about everybody. I really feel like I'm working with a great." Number of professionals, all of you are professionals, and I'm a professional. So what I'd like to say is I'm a professional. You don't have to identify that I'm Latina. Now that will take some courage, and but they will stop it after that because you'll be calling their attention to it. They don't know they're doing it most of the time, or if they do.
They do.
That's too much work. That's decades of work that you don't have time to do because you're on the move.
But managing through difference is a key part of this, right? You really have to learn how to get to a point of collaborative action despite different understandings, different interpretations, different ways of communicating. Just managing through difference is its own skill. And as people of color, pieces of that we do naturally because we had to, right? Because we're always a different one, right? No matter what, even if you are in a majority minority community, you still know that there's a whole other bubble out there that's different, right? And you have to learn how to manage in that space. And so there's some natural pieces that come naturally. But there are also some real actual technical skills and things that even we need to be trained on to do differently to manage successfully through that kind of difference that we're going to face in the workforce.
And it's different in the Midwest too, right? Because it's like, so there's a great description in Grand Rapids about that the community there is like so, philanthropy is so embedded in who it is, like they will be the first ones to give you dinner. They will give you the shirt off their backs, but they never want to know why you need it. And that really...
They don't want a relationship with you.
They don't want to know why.
They don't want to get to the system pieces of it.
Why you need it. They just want to provide it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's like, oh, you're a person, I'll give you whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, but then that is the place where moving in and developing relationships with potential allies whether it's on your team, whether it's your boss.
Your program officer.
You have to have allies in your space. You have to cultivate them and develop them, because otherwise you can't do it all alone. It's just too hard. You've got to stand up. When Treye was getting, the 50 questions from the board, his allies came to the front. And it's like, how do you develop those allies? Human to human, how do you develop that system of support? And if you can't find it internally, find it externally, but you have to have it.
No, I always think about this and talking about racial equity, even within our own racial communities. I love my parents. Right?
We all do.
They're both Hispanic, Cuban and Puerto Rican. And even within our own Hispanic community, there's they're Dominican, right? Like,
There's huge racism in our community. Let's just put it out there.
Right, and I'm thinking, as I'm trying to move up my career in positions of leadership, how I'm going to handle that racial equity, not only overall, but within our own communities, and how our own communities see other racial groups. I think that's huge, and I'm not sure how to handle that. And I'm thinking, I'm thinking, as I even speak out loud, that this is a question not only of our own communities, but also how we expand that outside of that. What should I do personally as I move up? How should I handle my parents? And how should I handle my brother and sister? And how should I handle the person I sit next to, I work next to? And what do I need? Do I need to always have this question? There's always this conversation, or do I need to keep going and be in that position of leadership, and or even how to get there? I know the question of education had come up too. That there was a great report that came up. The National Urban Fellows know this, and what we're talking about here. And there was a statistic that there are more people of color with higher levels of degrees than there are people of non-color. And there are a couple of us in our own program, National Urban Fellows, thinking about getting PhDs, going to law school to be able to get to where we need to. And then we're looking at people who are in the leadership positions that we want that don't need those degrees. So there's a lot going on in my head.
That's right. Yes. And, I mean, the better the name of the credential, the better off you are. I was telling Treye earlier this morning that I myself am a Bush Fellow, and I got to go to the Kennedy School for a master's degree. So the fact that I went to Harvard, really started to people. It was the same as I would get in my own community in many ways. I mean, in some ways it didn't, but it made a difference to people. So yes, we need to jump the higher obstacle, and so if you can do it, I would say do it. As far as your mother or your mom and dad, it's like, how much work do you want to do on them? And does it have the payoff that you want? And if it doesn't, I would say save your energy for your professional, because I que morenito. I'm telling you that all of our communities have a certain degree of class and race disparity. I mean, they just disparage other communities. I don't know.
It's across the board. It's Asians,
it's
Indian,
It's so you decide on what's worth the effort. My own mom is 94, and I know she's changed some, but I know, and I love her dearly. But I'm not gonna change everything about her, and I don't have the energy. I gotta work externally.
I think the other part of your question that resonates with me is the reality that, you know, it's representational politics, right? So you're in the room, great, right? You're the Latino in the room, but you're also aware that the Latino culture is real diaspora, right? So how are you really talking about racial equity that's reflecting the actual diaspora? And how much of you, you know, when you are the person in the room, the teachable moments are there, but they're like this big, right? And you really have to be strategic and thoughtful about what do you use it for, right? Do you use it to talk about race generally? Let's just talk about, you know, black versus white. And black can consume all things of color. Do we talk about, or do we want to dive deep into ethnic particularities, right? And I just think it's a, you know, open question every time you have that teachable moment. And you are really going to be the best person to judge how to use those moments and then reflect on them. Did I use it correctly? Would I do it differently next time? I think reflection is a huge part of leadership. You know, I really believe in it, and it's, you know, intentional reflection, you know, not just like off the side, you know, but real intentional. Like, what did I do today? What did I do this quarter? You know, what did I experience in that meeting, and what did I think about that decision, and would I do it again? And why or why not? You know, and you know, so there's like no real answer to your question other than even when you're in that position of leadership, it's still going to be a question. How much of the teachable moment can I spend on how broad a lesson? And it's just how it is right now. You know, I mean, we have there's a person in the Cleveland community. He's a very well-known Latino, he's white, Colombian, who probably, he's definitely the most active, wealthiest Latino in civic space. He's a businessman, but he's very active in civic space. And he does not acknowledge his own white privilege as a Latino. And he does not invest in that message when he has the opportunity, whether it's on boards of foundations, he has his own scholarship funds, he gives out individual grants, and he does not, that is not a piece of his philanthropic philosophy. It is not a piece of his civic leadership vision. And as another Latina in the space, and I see this, and I see him, and we are on panels together, and, you know, we've been in decision-making rooms together, and it's always a constant question for me. How much of a challenge am I going to present? Sometimes I take it up, and sometimes I don't. And it really just depends on the situation, and that's okay. You don't have to take every single fight every single time. You know?
And I would say, just be true to yourself. I mean, like, whatever it is. I mean, so I internalize what you said a lot, and I think about, so, you know, grew up, you know, almost middle class family, you know, went to private Jesuit, all white high school, all white college. I married a woman who was white. I have to code switch like 10 times a day, like we all do. But it's interesting. So, like, you know, when the first time, you know, when I have family members who I haven't seen in a while, and they see my wife, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, what's pregnant with the white girl?" Or I'm like I have to deal with that, and it's like, you know, or you know, when people in the, you know, when I go out to visit a grantee, and I mean, I get assigned to all the, you know, people of color, or the organizations led by people of color, and I'm like, oh, great, I got a black guy who understands me, and then like sometimes there are structural things where I can't fund them because of stuff that's, you know, outside of my control, but it's like, you know, you just got to figure out, I mean, you'll figure it out as you go, like, you know, how comfortable you are with sharing certain pieces, and how comfortable you are with speaking up in situations, and there will be times when you're like, look, I'm tired of, you know, just not saying it. I'm just going to throw it out there. And sometimes you have to like, oh crap, that was a bad idea, but I'm just going to throw it out there anyway. I mean, you're just going to, you know, over time, you'll develop your own strategy for how you handle your own personal self and all the complexities that you are, you know, and what that means in your work setting, what that means when you're the only person of color in the room. What that means when you're in a room like this, because I also think about, I wrote this note down about we need to be courageous in mixed situations, because, we're in this room, we're talking, we're open, but, let two white people walk in this room and the conversation is going to change and the tone will change, even though we outnumber them 12 to 1 or 12 to 2. The conversation changed because we start thinking about their feelings and not wanting to offend people. And so, like, all of those things that you're grappling with are complex, and like who you are as a person and how you act at work and at home and in your spare time. You'll just get a feel for that. I mean, you'll get a feel for how comfortable you are stepping out there and how comfortable you are saying, you know what, I'm just going to speak truth to power. And, somebody's going to be pissed off that I do it, but, I'm going to say it because everybody else in the room is thinking it. And when I say it, somebody else is going to co-sign on it. And then we're going to, and so you'll figure out the times and the places when you have those opportunities to speak and to say something impactful. And don't worry. I mean, you'll just figure it out. I mean, it's something that there's no good answer for it, but it'll come with your experiences, and as you're in the room and you get to speak and you get all these things and you take leadership position and you'll get there. I mean, there's it's just something everybody has to feel out. Everybody's going to handle that situation differently, and you'll do what's right for you.
Let me ask all of you, do you guys have where is your aspiration? I know you're dealing with your everyday problems right now, but I want you to think about for a minute. Treye and I were talking about it earlier, and I know that I filled out a form for a fellowship 20 years ago, and I said I wanted to be the chair of the Met Council, which is the group that combines all the local governments in the Twin Cities. I didn't get that, but I went to become the head of Hennepin County, the county administrator, which is the largest county in Minnesota. We had a $2 billion budget, 12,000 employees. And I was the first person of color ever to be, or woman to be in that role. And so, so how you think about your future, I think, is critically important, and that you have a goal is critically important, because if you don't, your energy will it'll be all over the place. So you need to really think about where is it that you want to go, and even if you don't end up exactly there, you'll end up something that's even better most of the time. But I just really want to encourage you to think about that and to write yourself little notes about how you think you'll get there. I will tell you in my own story that I got a Bush Fellowship. I worked in government most of my life, except for I worked for a cousin who had a set of stores. And anyway, I didn't get my degree until I was in my late 30s. I went to college on the weekends in order to get it. And I was at DOT at that time, the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I went to college on the weekends and then worked full time. And the only reason I did it is because I didn't think I knew I couldn't get a Bush Fellowship without an undergraduate degree, because I had taken a run at it. I thought, I don't need an undergraduate degree, I can just jump into a master's degree. But I am an anti-rule kind of person, so just know that. Anyways, they said, no, go back and get your degree. And I'm glad I did. It was a good experience for me. But I then went after a Bush Fellowship, got it, and this was almost a wholly paid, scholarship to the Kennedy School for a 1-year period. And then I came back, and I started to, as I came back, there were some Bush Fellows going into the Kennedy School. I had lunch with them. There's information flowing all over the place, right? It's always, and you have to find people who will give you information. So I sat with this group of people who were going into the Kennedy School, and one of the women happened to work for Hennepin County. She said, there's going to be a deputy county administrator position that's going to be funded. It's going to be created and funded. Now, this was a year before they actually did it. And I said, I said to myself, who do I know in that sphere, in the sphere of the county administrator, so that I can get my name in front of him with a resume. I just got out of the Kennedy School. I was coming, I got interviewed for a higher position at the Department of Transportation, at Minnesota Department of Transportation, but they didn't hire me because I think the hiring authority knew I was a rubble maker, so he didn't like me very much. And I was very mad about it. I cried and the whole thing, but I got over it and I said, okay, so when I heard about the Hennepin County position, I figured out which person I knew that would have the entree to the person who was going to do the hiring. And so it happened to be a former city council member and a woman who went to St. Kate's where I went to undergraduate school. And I had dinner with her and I said, do you think you can take my resume into Jeff Sparks? And she said, yep, I think I can. Let me do it. So she did it, and she called me later and said, he'll call you. Well, he didn't call me. And then I saw in the paper he was acting for a while, and then he was put in the permanent position. And so I just said, I'm going to call him up, and I'm going to go see him. So I called him up. I spent 30 minutes with him. I said, here's my resume. I think you got it from Kathy. So here's the point. You have got to pick up the phone and decide that you're going to run your own career. And you can't wait, because most people they're waiting for the tap on the shoulder. I'm going to take you to the promised land. And it ain't going to happen. So you have to be in the mix, way beyond the Latino community or communities of color, to be with those touchstones of people who are hiring people in power. And you have to develop relationships with them. It is critically important that you get a relationship with the people who will, the reason that I got, because I'm totally qualified, I got hired by the Minneapolis Foundation, but I had also been on the board 20 years before. And it was interesting because I was at the county as the county administrator, and here's how things go. And I'm just going to give you these little pieces of wisdom that I've learned along the way. So I was there probably for about 8 years, and I said, I'm going to retire from here because I want to go live in Mexico. I'm going to, whatever. And then I got a call from a headhunter that I didn't know about. My assistant knew about it. It was out of California. It was out of LA. And they were looking for a county administrator for LA County. Now, LA County has a budget of $21 billion at that time. That was like 11 years ago. And I said, God, I do not want to go to LA. I don't want to live in my car. I don't want to do this, that, and the other thing. And I had gone on one interview. And if you're in public service, you know that everything is public, including all of the interviews that you're doing and other. So I got called by a headhunter. They found out I was Latina. They took me to California. They interviewed me. I didn't get offered that job. But before I got off the plane back, my board knew that I had been on that interview, and I didn't tell them. And they were pissed, the chair of my board. And I said, okay, I'm sorry. I just went, blah, blah, blah. He said, well, if you ever do it again, let me know. So LA County called, or the headhunter for LA County called. And I have to say, and here's some just advice I'll give you. I said, I don't want to go to LA. And my assistant said, but I do, so take that call. I said, all right, Yolanda. So anyways, I started this conversation with the headhunter, and I said, I'm not interested in LA. He said, I really want you to look at this job. And it was the county administrator for LA County. I said, well, I don't think so. And he said, I'm going to be on a plane this date, and I'll see you in the morning. And so he got on a plane, and I saw him that next Monday morning, and he said, I'm going to take your resume. And I said, take my resume. Anyway, the upshot is that I finally got into the mix for LA County. I told my bosses so that I didn't make them mad a second time. And one of my bosses said, I really don't want this job because the foundation job had come up at the same time. And so there were two kind of, things going on. So I got offered the job for LA County the day before I took the job for the foundation. And it helped me negotiate a much better salary package than I would have. Yeah. So whatever you think strategically, and think about what it is that you really want to do. But don't let it just happen to you. I want you really, for me it was filling out the form for the National Hispano Leadership Institute that really got me to write down. And I had been in another institute where I'd written down some things. And all of those things, for me, when I write it down, it starts to become true. So I would just say, think about your career really, really seriously, and really figure out, and don't undersell yourself. And I have to tell you this, because when I was at the county, I would interview mostly white males, that would come through and they would say, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this, whatever. When it came to women and people of color, it's like, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that. It's like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Because I'm telling you, it's the first thing that enters our mind. So please think about how you're going to put all of your skills and talents out there. People are waiting to hear that positive note from you, and they'll hire you. So just a few
so
tips.
this is, I always find this story very funny because I'm a new mom, but in terms of putting yourself out there, this is gender-based, but it applies. There is a story in NPR about men always claiming expertise, right? Just being really willing to just say, yeah, I got it. What do you need, And there is a story, so there was a conference, they were in a room, and the speaker said, well, who in mixed company, men and women, who here considers themselves an expert in breastfeeding? The only person to raise their hand was a man. And he says, well, I watched my wife do it. It's like, what? So I mean, Sandy and I are completely aligned, different, obviously, career paths, but very similar approaches to what we think are key to success and messages, and I think when I mentioned leadership reflection, to me that's closely tied, if not the key part of planning. So knowing what you want to do, you have to be intentional about creating that space. One is reflection, and the next thing is what do you learn from that reflection. So I was a fellow you didn't see that in my background, and I used my 9 months as my fellowship. I used it every day I came home to research what I want to do next. I like hours on Google. I read an article about this organization. That sounds interesting. What do they do? Do I really think it's interesting? Oh, I saw this job description. What does that mean? What does this term mean? And how are people articulating that type of responsibility? And I just spent the time, said, when else am I going to get this time to really just kind of have an open question about what am I going to do next? Because as a fellow, it's a little different than your fellowship, but as a fellow, you can use those as nice natural breaking points to take a different turn and to try something new, right? And so when I, finishing my fellowship, I had a very clear vision about what I enjoyed about my career before my fellowship, what I had learned during my fellowship, what I liked about what I learned, what I didn't like about what I learned, the type of position I saw for myself in the next 5 years. I kind of only deal with 5-year intervals, and then what I thought I needed to learn to get there. So what was the position I needed to get to my 5-year goal, right? Because sometimes there's a step there. And I had done all of that research. So when Ron here came to my desk as a fellow, and he said, Sylvia, we want you to stay, right? And I said, great. But I wasn't really convinced, it's like, because I actually knew all that thinking I did, I didn't see that opportunity in Cleveland. And I said, oh, that's great, but I don't know. And he says, well, here's the job I want you to do. And it wasn't, that job didn't fit anything that I had told myself I wanted. And so I said, no, thank you. And he said, he was like, shocked. Like, who doesn't take a job in philanthropy? Everybody wants in philanthropy. The job opportunities happen once in a blue moon. Here's the CEO at your desk telling you in person. There's no posting, no nothing. And I said, no, that's not really what I want. And he said, well, what do you want? And because I had done all that planning, I was able to succinctly, clearly articulate, this is what I want. And then a month later, he came back with a job description that verbatim took what I said and put it on paper as a job description. And that's the type of power that when you're prepared to take advantage of the opportunity, you actually have when the opportunity arises, because it will arise. This is a group of dynamic, smart, ambitious, strategic people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this fellowship. You wouldn't be taking the risk that you are. So you'll get the opportunity, but are you going to be prepared to take advantage of it? And will you be able to leverage it for where you know you want to go? Because as Sandy says, nobody's going to tell you what to do. And don't depend on anybody, because you will never get to your full potential if you depend on somebody else to tell you how to get there. The other piece that I always share too is, Sandy mentioned kind of networking and building that network. And I would also say, don't be afraid to tell people what you want. Because that's the other thing. People, you're afraid, like, this is what I want, but if I say it, it doesn't happen, I'm going to be embarrassed, right? Or I'm going to show all my cards and I'm going to lose leverage. And whatever it is, if people resist the vulnerability that comes with sharing your dream, right? And it's not even if it's like your life dream, just your next step dream. It's vulnerable. It creates vulnerabilities. And I would say don't let that overcome the opportunity to tell somebody how they can help you. Because you never know what people know. And you never know what other rooms they're sitting in, what job opportunities they're going to know about, who's going to refer you. Oh, okay, she said that she really was interested in this, and they just told me they're looking for somebody. They may never come to you and say they dropped your name, but they may still drop your name. And then when you get that call, it's going to be matched to what you said you wanted because you let them know how to help you. And I think that's also another piece that people of color don't do enough.
Can I add to that? So as you guys were talking, when I went into my new position, so I worked for the Center for Latino Studies, and I supervised college students, and I really wanted to go in intentionally listening to what I was walking into. And so I'm big on qualitative data, and I let the students do their own performance reviews, and with the intention of getting information, right, out of them. And so in comparing my Latino students, both male and female, my non-white students and my white students, all of the white students gave themselves perfect or really high markings, where all of the Latino students gave themselves mid or low. And it didn't make a difference in gender. And I had realized in that point, not only more affirming that representation, but even the models, the role models that they have, or the lack thereof, or even the behavior, that I guess we are role models. We are, the next generation is looking at us, and if it takes us till we get into our 40s to start being bold, it's going to take them that much longer. But I think so. I just wanted to add that.
I think that's so true. I mean, my job is to build people, is to help people, is to support people. I mean, my career has been fabulous. My job is to pass on whatever success I've been able to have to other people like you. And I'm in a lot of rooms like this. And I just want to say that it is just such a pleasure to meet all of you. And hopefully we'll cross paths again. But any way that I can, support you or give you information or whatever. And, I'm on some national boards, and so I had people calling me saying, do you know so-and-so, independent sector is looking for a new CEO. What do you think they're looking for? So I was able to, hey.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to say hi to you guys before I catch a plane.
Ron.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi.
Here's one of our compadres here.
To be honest, I didn't even know you were meeting here today. I didn't even know you were meeting until I saw this nice person in the hall and said, who are you here with? She said, HIP. I said, Hispanics in Philanthropy HIP? And she said, yeah. I said, I didn't know they were meeting here today. What are you talking about?
The CEO is the last to know.
Pardon?
You still on the board?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am. What are you planning? What are you plotting?
We're
Great
talking about
careers.
racial equity and career development.
Oh, wonderful.
And Ron could share, he has great stories too. He would share many stories related to this. If you had the opportunity.
Be happy to anytime. Where are you from? Can I ask real quickly?
Sure, and I will make the introduction. I just got here. I'm presenting on the next session, so I'm making an introduction to everybody. I'm Efrain Gutierrez. I live in Seattle with FSG, a nonprofit consulting firm. We're going to be talking about racial equity tools to implement racial equity in their organizations.
So I'm Ogechi Opara. I'm a National Urban Fellow at the United Way of Greater Cleveland.
Saw you the other night. Yeah.
Yes.
Good to see you.
I am Michelle Del Toro. I am in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at Cleveland Clinic. So I am from Cleveland.
Good.
I'm Nora Garcia. I'm officially meeting. And I'm a consultant with the Field Foundation, the Pritzker Traubert Foundation, and the Healthy Communities Foundation.
I'm Carmela Beck. I'm a National Urban Fellow from San Diego, and I'm placed at the Cleveland Water.
I'm Peter Orozco. I'm a National Urban Fellow from New Jersey, and I'm at United Way of Greater Cleveland.
I'm Mireille Jose. I'm the program manager of the leadership program in Mexico. At HEAP, yeah.
And I'm Michael Gonzalez. I'm her counterpart for the U.S. program, leadership program with Ed.
Sure, Jackson.
Jessica Desma. I'm a program coordinator with the Center for Latino Studies at Pérez State University in Michigan.
Yes, I know. It's so nice to have you here. And thanks for doing what you're doing for him. Can I do anything to make your stay better here?
You can maybe have Kim come by and drop off your cards. They can all email you.
Anything I can do to help any of you, I'd be happy to. Good. All right. All right, I'll get out of here and let you get to your work. Thank you. I'm leaving for Utah.
Oh.
Because Robert Redford invited me to a small meeting of Foundation CEOs to talk about the future of the arts during the Trump era.
Oh, that sounds like a challenge.
Yeah.
And my son's comment to me was, if you have Robert Redford send me a video, I'm going to kill you. Because a few days ago, Isabel Allende was here.
Yes.
Speaking at our Municipal Book Awards. She won Lifetime Achievement. And we became fast friends over dinner because we were with her for 2 days. And I said, Isabel, do you like to play tricks on people, pranks? And she said, I love to play pranks. I said, my son's at the University of Toronto. He just moved to Canada for obvious reasons. And
For obvious reasons.
And he was, every time I talked to him, I'd say, how you doing? He'd go, oh, I had a lot of, I was at a pub with my friends last night. I made this friend from Chile. Now I have a friend from Argentina. Now I have a friend from Nigeria. And so I said, it sounds like a lot of drinking, son. So anyway, he opened his email a couple of days ago, and he loves Isabella. It's his favorite. He's read all of her books in Spanish. So he opens his email, and there's this thing. Hi, Nick. It's Isabella Allende, your favorite author, with a message from your father. More studying, less drinking.
Oh my God, that is totally.
So just to interject, looks like we have lunch set up, and I don't want to stop the flow of the conversation. I love the organic nature of it. So if you guys are hungry, please help yourselves some food. We can continue this conversation over lunch, and FAA will be beginning around 1 o'clock. Perfect. And Sylvia, you have to leave.
I leave at 12:30, but happy to continue talking through lunch.
Perfect. Okay. And Treye is going to stay with us as well.
Probably about the same time, 12:30, 1 o'clock, somewhere in there.
Why?
No.